This is part 2 of drawing the human head. If you haven't watched the first video called The Human Head, watch that video because it lays the foundation for what we're talking about in this video. Remember, in the first video I was explaining how the cranium of the head is shaped like a ball. That would be this outer circle. And then there's an inner circle that we draw that is 2/3 the size of the outer circle. That's this circle here. And this inner circle is a critical measurement for the entire layout of the features that are on the human head, whether it's a male or female. And you'll also recall that when you're viewing the front of the human head, that the shape of the cranium is a ball with this much cut off of each side. And when we divide the inner ball in half, the midpoint of the ball represents the brow of the face. The bottom of the inner ball represents the bottom of the nose. And the top of the inner ball represents the hairline. Then we take the same distance that's between the nose and the brow and the hairline, and that is the distance between the bottom of the nose and the bottom of the chin on the average person. And then I'll mark the top of the head just to show you how the outer ball aligns with the top of the cranium. So remember, on the average person, the distances are the same between the hairline, the brow line, the bottom of the nose, and the bottom of the chin. That makes it convenient for drawing, but really only from this front view. And one more thing to remember, the top of the ear typically aligns with the brow line, and the bottom of the ear typically aligns with the bottom of the nose on the average person. The reason we developed this standard for drawing the human head is that when we're drawing someone and they have bigger ears or a bigger nose or a wider mouth or a longer chin, then from this standard that we're used to, we can adjust those measurements as needed. Makes drawing the human head much easier. So now I'll mark this line as the hairline. This will be the brow line. This will be the bottom of the nose, or the nose line. And then this line will be the chin, or the bottom of the chin. Now I'll develop this cranium over here that I've drawn by drawing in a few lines to show you how we develop the human head from this outer ball and inner ball and the measurements that we've marked on it. After I get the bottom of the chin marked, I'll usually add this rectangle at the bottom that represents the chin. Then I'll have a target to shoot for when I'm drawing my lines from the ear down to the chin and the cheekbone down to the chin. I'll usually add a little mass on each side of the cranium because the head is usually angled in towards the neck. Then I usually place the ears because I know that the top of the ear starts at the brow line and the bottom of the ear finishes at the bottom of the nose. So they're usually easy to place. You can already see the head developing here. Now I'll draw the jaw line from the bottom of the ear to the bottom of the rectangle, which represents the chin. Then I draw my cheekbone. You can see it comes right off of that inner ball in the shape of an S and ties into the top part of the rectangle. Now make a note here where the center of the eyes are. You'll get better at locating the eyes with a little practice. Now let's just mark the neck and the shoulders here. It always helps to see the shoulders and the neck because it makes the head look more convincing. So that's the basic shape of the head from the front view. But things change when someone turns their head or raises their head or lowers their head. And there's a couple different ways that things change, and we'll talk about that right now. But before we go into that, I want to show you the most important spot on the head. And it's right here, right in the center of the nose and at the brow line. When you're beginning to draw the head and you're laying it out, this is the most important point on the head, this cross right here. So now let's look at a real person. We'll look at my mode. Notice here on the right, the mechanical ball. That point right there is the cross point. The middle of the ball is the brow line. And so you look at the photograph, that point right there is the point that you watch for when you're drawing a head at a different angle. So watch here as I match the ball on the right with the cross point of the photograph, which is right between the eyes and at the brow line. Now keep in mind here that The left side of the ball and the right side of the ball would be cut off when I start my drawing. Now let's try another angle. So what I'm doing is trying to place that cross point right up there where I see it on the photograph. So see how I'm adjusting the cross point to fit right between the eyes and right on the brow line. Now one more time. I'll lower my head and I find that cross point on the ball, place the cross point right where I see it on the photograph, between the eyes on the brow line. Now, there's another thing we need to cover before we start drawing, because you'll have to understand this in order to get your drawings right. So let's set in our mind that this point right here is the middle of the nose, right between the eyes, and the black horizontal line is the brow line. And notice that the brow line is perfectly straight when you're viewing the person from the front. But as they lift their head, the brow line starts bending, and the closer it gets to the outer edge of the ball, the more it bends. Now this green line represents the axis on which your head tilts up and down. It would be like having an axle running through your head from ear to ear, and your head tilts up and down on this axle or axis. And the reason this point is important is because as your brow line bends, the line starts at one side of the axis, bends around the ball, and ends up at the other side of the axis. And of course, the further away it gets from the axis, the more it bends. Or you can see it as the closer it gets to the outside of the ball, the more it bends. A lot of people have trouble with this because they don't know where to start and end the curved line. But think of the line as starting at one side of the ball and ending at the other side of the ball, and that there's an axis that's splitting the ball in half. Now when someone lowers their head on this axis, the same thing happens. The line starts bending, and the closer it gets to the outside of the ball, the more it bends. But each side of the curved line always goes to the axis. Now let's look at the line that goes down the middle of the face. There's an axis there too. This would be your head turning left and right. As someone turns their head to the right or left, the curved line bends more and more. The line starts at the top of the ball and ends at the bottom of the ball. So what happens when a person turns their head and looks up? Well, here's the axis from our cross point going through the middle of the ball. And notice here how the brow line is curved, and it helps you position the ear on the side of the head. Now there's a rule to be learned right here. You'll notice that when we're looking at eye level at the front of a person's face, there's a horizontal axis and a vertical axis, and they are at right angles. Those axes always stay at right angles through the ball. Now another thing to remember here is when the brow line is above eye level, the curved line curves up. I think of it as a frown. And then when the brow line goes below the eye level, the curved direction is down. And I think of it as a smile. So you have a frown and a smile. When the brow line is above the horizon line, it's a frown. When it's below the horizon line, it's a smile. So now let's look at the head when somebody turns their head left and right. Remember, these axes pierce through the center of the ball. They're not on the outside of the ball, but you'll notice that they're still at a right angle. They'll always stay at a right angle no matter how they tilt up and down. When a person tilts their head up, the axis tilts up with it, but it stays at a right angle. I have a line drawn through the horizontal axis and a line drawn through the vertical axis, and they're at right angles. This will make more sense to you when we begin to draw. You'll also notice the brow line is curved. And remember, we draw a curved line across the ball from one side of the axis to the other side of the axis. And you'll notice that the brow line is above the horizon line, so it is a frown. And now here's the middle of the face line. This would be where the nose is. And remember, we draw a curved line from one axis around the ball to the other axis. Now in this case, our cross point on our brow line is so close to the edge that the top of our vertical axis is hidden. And so this curved line disappears around the back of the ball right after it touches the cross point. Now let's talk about our inner circle, which represents the side of the head. This would be a side view of a person's head. This inner circle is only a perfect circle when you're looking directly at it from the side. This circle becomes an oval anytime a person tilts their head, turns their head, or leans their head. One of the things that makes drawing a head so complicated is that a person can tilt their head, turn their head, and lean their head all at the same time. So you get foreshortening and complicated perspective all at the same time. Here's an example of a person turning their head, tilting it back, and leaning to the left. No wonder it's so hard to draw a good head. You can see here how our circle has become a flattened circle, which is obviously an oval. I'll move it out here so you can see the extreme change in the perfect circle. In our next video, we'll finally get to start drawing. I know this is taking some time, but drawing the human head is one of the most complicated efforts that an artist can attempt.